Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rise Above Justice Movement podcast. My name is Zachary Mallory, and I am the host of the Rise Above Justice Movement, the podcast, and the founder of the Rise Above Justice Movement. I would like to give a very broad viewer discretion is advised due to the nature of discussion and the topics that we will be talking about on this podcast episode. Again, viewer discretion is advised. As a thriving survivor and registered victim of crime, Amanda Carrasco has used her experiences to impact the lives of her community and those impacted by the justice system. She is a dynamic speaker, consultant, and leader who values community and justice. Amanda, welcome to the Rise of Justice Movement podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, you talk a lot about restorative justice. You talk a lot about being a victim of crime, but you're also branded as the brave one. Can you walk us through a little bit of your experience, what led you into getting into restorative justice, and then we'll kind of highlight like where you are now, but we'll get that in just a little bit. But walk us through what it means to be the brave one.
I'm not sure how many of your listeners are familiar with the ACEs test, the Adverse Childhood Experiences test. It was developed by Kaiser Permanente in the 80s, I believe it was. They were looking at different contributions in terms of health and overall sort of thriving success in life and some of the inhibiting factors. So it's a scale from 0 to 10, basically 10 being, the highest score that you can get, which means you've experienced an incredible amount of trauma in your life. And, 0 being no trauma. So they found that, a significant number of people would have one or maybe two. I believe it was about a quarter that would have like three or four. And my score on the scale is 8. So I'm up there on a scale that you don't want to be up there for. There's been a lot, and I know we'll sort of touch on some of those specifics. And I appreciated the disclaimer at the beginning because there is a lot. And but it basically meant that like statistically, I was sort of not positioned to do well in life, through physical, mental, emotional, challenges that, their life was going to be a much harder battle for me to be successful as a person, as an adult, because of what I had experienced. And so becoming the brave one was really about defying those odds. And I love, so I've written a book and it's called Becoming the Brave One, My Journey to Justice. And a reviewer just wrote and they said, this isn't just a memoir, this is an act of defiance. And that really resonated with me because it's really, I feel like my life is an act of defiance. Like being successful, being a thriving person, is not who I was supposed to be in life. It wasn't how I was positioned. And I'm telling my story because I'm not super special or unique. Like I don't have superhuman qualities or things that most people don't have other than just like a sheer determination to make it. And I also want to kind of add one, characterization in terms of success. I don't see people that have wealth or fortune or whatever as successful. I believe that I'm successful because I get up in the morning and I can look at myself in the mirror and I really like who I am. And I am living out my values and I'm showing up in the world in a way that is true to myself and who I feel that I am. That is absolutely successful. Any of the other things that have come out in my work that other people would sort of societally deem successful, that's been a byproduct because of the healing work I've done to come to the place of affirming who I am, making decisions based on who I am. And so I think that's really important that people understand, my definitions and where I'm coming from when I talk about success and when I talk about, being brave and overcoming, because it's not just me. There's a lot of people out there that have experienced a lot of trauma and you're not over, like you don't have to be. You can write your story, but it's going to be hard. It's going to be a lot of work. You and I are going to get into some of that, but it's possible, right? So it's very possible, but you have to be brave.
Absolutely. And, bravery comes in many forms and fashions, and it looks different to every single individual, because I believe in an individual approach, because what would have worked for you may not have worked for me as far as like the healing journey, right? And
Hmm.
it's unique to each person. But one thing that we can all agree on is the need for justice.
Hmm.
And I would love to learn about what restorative justice looks like to you and why it's important to recognize the need for restorative justice, especially in the United States with our complex systems. Like, we are always asked the question of why didn't you report or why didn't you just leave, right?
Hmm.
I know I've been asked that numerous times. I'm sure you have, and I know my mom was, several others. But what does restorative justice look like to you, and why is it important to recognize the values of restorative justice?
So, in order to get to restorative justice, I'm going to back up a little bit and just, acknowledge the fact that I am a survivor of sexual assault, and that includes multiple different perpetrators and multiple assaults by some of the same perpetrators. I'm also a family survivor of homicide, and when I was 16, I was living with a woman who adopted me as her sister. She had legal guardianship of me and her husband and her children, and we were all living together. And her husband had made a decision that he didn't want to be married anymore. He didn't want the responsibilities, he didn't want this whole life. And so he had made a plan that he was going to end all of our lives except his and portray a theory that, a stranger had come and murdered us. And now he's this grieving, widow, lost his family, poor him. Unfortunately, that didn't work out exactly for him, but it's I mean, it's sorry. It's taking a minute, and that's okay. That's okay. I'm looking at the picture of my sister and the kids like right beside me right here. So that's why it paused. But so he had a plan to murder us all that night. And my sister and I actually had a disagreement because I wanted to go stay with this boy. We were going to do this road trip. And she said no, I couldn't do this because I was 16 years old, and no, I was not going to do a road trip with another teenage boy, which was wisdom. My sister was very wise. But I was a teenager and I, wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. So I was really upset with her. And I had said, you know what, can I have a sleepover at my girlfriend's house? Like, is that okay? And she said yes. So I left the home that night. And had I been home, then I would not be here because that night he did murder her and two of the children. One survived. So I didn't know, obviously until the next day I got a phone call and, kind of learned a little bit of what was going on, but we didn't know. It took several months for us to actually come to kind of realize that it was him who did this. We really did genuinely think at the beginning there was a random stranger out there who was, such a danger to the community that he would harm, this beautiful woman and her children. The twins were 13 months old, so I mean, they were babies. And it was quite, the whole thing was absolutely horrific. So all of those things, had kind of come with me. Like my home, my biological family wasn't a very safe place, and that's how I had come to be living in what I thought was a safe place. My sister loved me and cared for me, and she was strong, she was courageous, she was brave. She was working through some of her own traumas and wanting to impart in me some of her healing journey, and I just was really um, like I was definitely benefiting from that, although I was a teenager that was kind of like, whatever, but I see now looking back, like how the words that she spoke to me and her processes of, you know, pushing through and identifying lies and rebuilding with truth, like how that really deeply impacted me back then. So I she was like my light in this very dark place, and then she was gone. So I mean, we talked about like CPTSD. And I mean, when you have all of this background, that's what it encapsulates. Like some people just have one traumatic experience and they have to work through that. But there are those of us that are 8 out of 10 on the ACEs score. And we have so many traumas that, I mean, where do you even start? So for me, it was just a matter of survival at that point, like just getting through each day. And there's a lot of time that I've lost in my memory that I don't remember. Like there's a lot of just, it's just black. Like it's not there. I think because the pain was so, so great, so devastating. Like losing a family member that you really love and value and have such a close relationship is really difficult. And that grief is, you know, a certain level. But then you take that and they've been murdered. And then you take that and they're murdered by someone that you loved and cared for and thought also loved and cared for you and was protecting you guys. And he turns out to be the person that caused all this pain. So carrying that has been incredibly hard. And that's why it's complex, PTSD. And I just kind of was doing the best that I could. But I mean, I was angry, I was bitter, I wanted him dead. You know, when all of this happened, like I was 17 when I testified at the trial against him, and I would have done anything to end his life. You know, like that was how I felt. And so I carried all those things. I carried all the pain. I carried all the lies about myself that come out of those types of things. You know, from sexual assault, there's lies you believe about yourself, like you're only basically good as a sexual object. I'm not, I don't have value and worth. I'm dirty. I'm used. I'm all those things that I really kind of believed, and those impact your decisions. So it was it was a challenge. Like it was a super challenge just to kind of go day by day. And you know, I mean, I lived. I don't know that I thrived, you know, certainly not, but I made it through days. I was still here, and there definitely were, you know, some very dark times that I just kind of made it through, and I'm not sure exactly how, but I did. There were certainly lots of other people that I appreciate, you know, other friends or, you know, people that have kind of stepped in that loved on me at different places and different times depending on where I was at, and I appreciate all of that. You know, you don't know how even some of the little things that you do, a little text message or a little card or whatever it is that you're sending to someone that maybe just literally gets them through. So never underestimate those little acts of kindness that you do for people, because it really does matter. And I think that there's not one thing or one person that kind of helped me get through, but I think it was a collaborative community that helped me survive. And then I started reaching a point where I didn't want to just survive anymore. I really wanted to live. And I remember calling a crisis line and asking for help because I said, like, I don't like the way I'm living. I don't like I'm not happy. I'm not good. I'm not okay. It was basically what I was saying. And they said, well, are you suicidal? And I said, well, if you're suicidal, like you kind of want to die. And I don't want to die. That's the thing. Like, I actually want to live, but I don't know how. And she said, well, I'm sorry, we can't help you. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? You know, like I'm trying to not get to that place, but if you don't help me right now, that's where we're going to go. And I was so frustrated and devastated that that was the answer. But so I kind of said, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out myself. And there's a variety of things. I wish I could give you like this 7 steps to healing from CPTSD, but I can't because I don't think that exists. But what I can tell you is that I just kept fighting for answers, you know, even when I didn't feel like it. And I think that's the thing about being brave is that it's not about you feeling like you've got it all together or knowing all the answers. It's about the fact that you're doing things and you're scared anyways. You're moving forward even though you don't know all the pieces, but you're just going to take those steps. That's what bravery looks like. Sometimes it is literally getting up in the morning. And other times it is going to face your abusers, you know, and that kind of a thing. So there's a full gamut in there, and bravery is whatever it looks like for you in this moment that you don't feel you have the confidence to do, that you don't feel that you're qualified for, and just doing it anyways, because you know this is what you're supposed to be doing. So I sought out, you know, different ways for help. There weren't a lot of podcasts back then, you know, because this is probably like the early 2000s. You know, I come back, I predate cell phones, so I am an older generation. But you know, there were also like a lot of books, and I read people's stories and talked to people and heard their stories. And that's why I believe stories matter. That's why I wrote mine, is because I know, you know, someone's going to read it, and pieces of it are going to help them, because learning what worked for other people was something that helped me too. I also finally did get into therapy, and I've seen a number of different therapists. So that's an aspect. But one thing that was definitely very, very significant for me, and I wish I had the exact pinpoint, daytime and how, but I heard about this concept of restorative justice. I, had never heard of it before. I had no idea what that was. But I've always loved the law. I actually wanted to be a lawyer when I was a teenager, but I didn't think I was smart enough. I didn't think, I was like, where would I ever get the money to go to school to become a lawyer? Like, it was like, that is unattainable for me. Now I have two master's degrees in law. We're good. But back then, yeah, I was just like, this is not a thing. This is not a thing. But I love the law. I watched every judge show that you could think of. I'll date myself, The People's Court. But Judge Judy, Judge Mathis, like everything and anything that I could get my hands on. I love the law. So I came in contact with this principle called restorative justice. And I was like, what even is this? And so it's really about concepts. And the idea is bringing victims back into the center. And so in our current system, we are adversarial. We pit people against each other. And the prosecution represents the state. They don't actually technically represent the victim at all. They represent the state. And obviously, the defense represents the defendant. And these two parties sort of go head to head in a courtroom to find a winner. And in the middle of all of that, a victim is lost because they're the person that was hurt. This is their story, this is their pain, but it's not about them anymore. It's not even about what happened. So I was very intrigued by this concept and idea that brings victims back into the middle. Restorative justice really fundamentally lies on three questions, which is who was harmed, how were they harmed? Let's look at all the factors about how we got here. And then three is how do we move forward? What are we looking at in terms of repair and restoration as much as is possible? Because in some cases, restoration is not possible. You can't bring my sister and the kids back. But how do we move forward and what does that look like? So, this idea was radical to me. I mean, that's not what we do. We have to protect people and we keep them apart. We don't bring them together. Like this is super strange. So, I started digging deeper into it because I like challenges and it was intriguing. And I signed up for a certificate program at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, Canada. And I ended up in a class with a guy who was running a program at CTF Soledad in California. And this was during COVID. So everything was online. And so he invited me, do you want to Zoom into the prison with us? And I said, sure. Like I'm curious about this. Let me see the work that you're doing with incarcerated people. This was kind of my really, I think only like the second contact with incarcerated communities. And so that was also new to me because again, like I'm on the other side, right? I'm a victim. So I don't associate with them. I don't talk to them. They're them and I'm on the victim side. But so I was very curious. And so we started zooming into CTF Soledad and I started connecting with the men that are incarcerated there. We would talk about books, we would talk about art. I got into Steinbeck, as a result of that program. Super great, Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men. Oh, which I could only read once. Can't do that again. But the ideas and the concepts are so strong. And then talking about it with them, and I started building relationships and getting to know people and people who had caused great harm. Like these are people that have committed rapes, that have committed murder. And so this was very interesting to me. And I actually found it incredibly healing because they gave me a lot of hope. The man who murdered my sister, like, he's not repentant, he is not remorseful. And there's a level of pain that comes with that. You'll see when people talk about restorative justice, they talk about the ideals where they'll say, the offender has to be repentant or remorseful. No, they don't have to be. That's a misnomer, actually. In an ideal world, yes, they are. And typically, that's how you proceed. But, in my case, which, I'll get to, he's not that. But so connecting with these men who genuinely were and are remorseful, who are repentant, who have really done the hard work to examine like why they are where they are and made the decisions that they made. And a lot of them like they would give anything to go back and undo the harm. But you can't. That's a thing. So that was super super significant for me. And then learning more and more about the process and what it looks like because restorative justice is different depending on the context. It can come like pre-incarceration, it can come post-incarceration. So it really depends on where you're at and, where all the parties are at and what their needs are. It doesn't have to be face-to-face meetings, but again, in an ideal, you are bringing together the victim or victims and communities, the offender, possibly some of their community, to come together in a dialogue session to answer those questions and talk about those things. And then, make a plan going forward. And like I say, this can come, before people are even charged, or you can make sentencing plans together. Or in my case, it was 28 years after my sister was murdered. So as I got to know about this concept, I had to go for parole hearings and read victim statements because my former brother-in-law was trying to get out of jail. And I have a victim worker, and I mentioned to her, like, hey, I'm, doing this study on restorative justice. And she said, oh, she said, well, that's an option here, if you're interested. And I said, that's so nice. No. I was not interested at all when she first explained it. But again, like as I got to know the people in the community, and I started actually thinking about what do I need? What are my needs in this at this point in time? And I realized that I actually had a need to talk to him because I needed to share my pain. I felt like I wanted to tell him what I carried every day, what he had left me with, the harm that he had caused me. A lot of victims have questions about like why did this happen or why did you choose me? Those are very common, and a lot of those can only be answered by the perpetrator. In my case, I didn't have those questions because a lot of things came out before, during, and after trials. So those questions were kind of answered for me. But I still had that need to have a voice because my power, my voice, all of that was taken away. I was at the mercy of the state. Like I did what I was told, because they needed to build their case. And so I was just at their disposal. And that was that. So, fast forward 28 years later, and he actually agreed to a restorative justice conference, and there were four of us. There was myself, there was him, there was my restorative justice worker, and the prison chaplain. He had asked if the chaplain could be a part, and I agreed on the condition that the chaplain didn't talk. So we sat face to face, and it was a total of 4 hours with one break in the middle. And it was the hardest thing that I have ever done in my entire life. It definitely was its own trauma to go through. I'm not going to make light of it. And anybody that says like restorative justice is soft on crime, they don't know what they're talking about because they've never been in a position like this. It is the hardest thing, and including for both parties. And that actually gave me some power because I was afraid of him. Like, I mean, this is a man who wanted to murder me at one point. I was very afraid he was going to get out of jail and come and try to finish the job. I was afraid that he was angry because I helped, get him convicted. And so I had said, at no time in this process do I want him standing over me. I need him to sit down and be seated at all times. So he and the chaplain actually entered the room first and sat down. And then I came in. And when I came in, his back was partially towards me and I could see him shaking. And that was such an empowering moment for me because I could see that I was having an impact on him. That was a strange concept to me, like I never thought that that could be a thing, and that I would, maybe even make him a little bit nervous or potentially possibly afraid, like that was just so empowering. So we went in and we had our conference and I was able to share with him and I told him, I said, there's not been a day in my life that I haven't wished that I was home. And it's not because I thought that I would be able to stop you, but because if I was home, I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't have to carry the pain that I carry every single day. That's never going to go away. I have something that will always be with me until I take my last breath. And Susan and the babies and I are going to be kicking it with Jesus, and hanging out. But until then, I carry this loss. I carry this grief. Now I carry it differently because of the work that I've done to heal, but I'm still carrying it. And that was what I needed him to know. I needed to say to him, like, you knew my background. You knew why I was living with you. And yet this is what you chose to do. Like, how selfish of you. You ended people's lives. You know how beautiful she was, how much she loved you. And they were babies. So to be able to like confront him and say that to him and see those things have an impact, um, Afterwards, I definitely didn't sleep for like 3 weeks, but once I had calmed my nervous system down, convinced myself that I am safe, I actually slept deeper. There's a level of fear that has decreased because I was able to go and sit and confront him in that, sort of safe environment. There were a lot of other things that we got out of it, and that was really helpful for me as well. So I definitely, this is why I'm such an advocate for restorative justice because I mean, I've done the research, like my first master's degree in law was on restorative justice law reform. I've been into all of the data and the numbers. There are higher victim satisfaction rates. There's lower recidivism. People don't go back and commit harms as high of a rate as our carceral system. And so these things are actually working. But I also can say, like, I lived this, I chose this, and it helped me in a big, big way. It helped release me from fear that I never would have been released from unless waiting till he passed away. And I obviously don't know when that will be, but now I don't have to carry that until that day. So there's some significant things. He gave me some memories back. My sister did not like us to say no to the babies. We used to have to say, please don't. And it drove us bonkers, but that's how she was. She was very fiercely protective of her kids and of me. And that was, I mean, that was significant for me because I had been so unprotected for the majority of my life. So having her in that role, and having, like I say, like that memory back, that was incredible for me to have that. So restorative justice can do some great things that our current system can't. And I'm not saying abolish the system in entirety, but I am saying that victims need to have this option. My restorative justice caseworker did his PhD on cases like mine. We call them the complex and sensitive cases, which basically means like rape, murder, the serious crimes. And you would not, like I say, like we're raised to think, don't bring these people together, but yet this actually can bring a significant level of freedom and healing. And the guys that I work with now that are incarcerated, I mean, they'll tell me hands down, it's way easier to sit in their prison cell than to confront, like to be confronted by the person that they harmed. Even if you think about that yourself, I was in a room doing a panel last week and I said, how many of you have hurt somebody? You've said something wrong or you lashed out or whatever it is, like you've hurt someone. How much easier is it when you harm someone to just pay a fine or go on a timeout versus actually having to sit down, listen to the impact of your actions, and take responsibility and say you're sorry. And that was something too that I was able to say to him as I said, look, I know that you're not taking responsibility. Like I know that you're not like remorseful. And I hate that you have any impact on my healing, but you do. And I said, just so you know, like this does have an impact on me. And if and when one day you actually decide to do the work and deal with what you've done, that would be helpful and beneficial to me, just so you know. So I don't know that he'll ever do that. I hope so. But um, yeah, so I mean, that's a lot on my journey to restorative justice that brought a lot of healing. And there's just one other little amendment that I want to add to, which is I had the opportunity to have an informal restorative justice meeting with a family member who had sexually assaulted me for a decade. And I didn't know it was restorative justice at the time. I just knew that I had questions and I had approached him and said, like, can we meet and talk and specifically talk about what happened? And he said yes. And I don't recommend that people do that. That can really backfire. And I've heard of it backfiring. So that's why, like I'm a restorative justice facilitator. We are out there to help guide, to do risk management, to make sure that it doesn't further harm because you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable place. So we want to make sure that you're safe. We want to make sure that all parties are safe. But I did this thing not knowing, like what I was sort of embarking upon. But I was really thankful that I did because we sat together, just him and I, and I at that point I did have some of those questions like why did this start? Why did this happen? Like I'm so confused. And he was able to fill in those answers for me, which were very significant. But in this case, he also took full responsibility and he was super remorseful. And he said, like, if he could go back and do anything to take it back, he would. And so that was huge. And we talk about forgiveness, and I feel like I have forgiven him. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't mean I don't still have triggers and don't have an impact by what happened to me because those are very real realities. However, it means I don't feel like I have to harbor this anger or hatred or anything towards him because I now understand the context of how those things came to be. I understand, how he feels. And I also, and this is significant, I don't believe he's gone on to hurt anyone else. That is also a need for victims. Like we can't go back and stop what happened from happening to us. We don't have a time machine as of yet, but it's important for us that more people aren't harmed. We want it to stop. We need it to stop. Let me be the last one. And so that's another thing that restorative justice, again, really helps with because you can talk to the person and explain that to them and see where they're at. They can, develop empathy for their victims because a lot of times you dehumanize and that's how you commit crime. That's how you harm people is because you've dehumanized. And so restorative justice brings back the humanity to all the parties. So for offenders, that means they're seeing people, not just their own needs or whatever they want or whatever the situation is, but they literally see people. And it's harder to harm someone when you see them as a person. And again, that's contributing to that lower recidivism rate. But so yeah, so that's how and why I am such a huge advocate of restorative justice and, kind of a little synopsis of what that looks like.
Thank you so incredibly much for being who you are, doing what you do, and you break it down that it's easy to understand. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what restorative justice is. There's a lot of misconceptions about what healing looks like, and just the way that you do it. It breaks it down so easily to be understood. Really quickly, I want to pivot and talk about something because October is known as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And there's a recent article from KSHB 41, which is a local news station and an NBC affiliate here in Kansas City. The headline is Kansas City's unique domestic violence court handles nearly 200 cases daily, driving change to stop violence. Kansas City Municipal Court leaders have created an unusual approach to handling domestic violence cases. One judge oversees thousands of domestic violence violations each month. Court leaders say the process, which they call a hub of judicial innovation, sets KC apart from court systems across the country. Presiding Judge Courtney Watchell, I think is how you say her name. I apologize if that's not the correct way of saying it. Of the 16th Judicial Circuit Court of Missouri, Kansas City Municipal Division, has exclusive jurisdiction over all domestic violence violations within Kansas City limits. She handles nearly 200 cases per day, Monday through Friday, starting at 9 a.m. in Division 203. This judge is incredible. And I cannot imagine what goes through her mind every time she sees this, and unfortunately, my mom's been a part of this system with her domestic violence cases herself. She doesn't know Courtney. This was like many, many years ago. But I asked her, I said, if this would have happened whenever, or if this existed whenever you were going through your domestic violence, would it have made the impact better for you or worse? She said, honestly, it would have made me better because I would have been, seen as believed,
Mhm.
because the system like it failed my mom. Um, Most domestic violence cases in Kansas City go from pushing to strangulation are filed as ordinance violations in municipal court rather than as felonies or misdemeanors at the county level. They include intimate partner violence or IPV, child abuse, child endangerment, violations of protective orders, stalking, and violence between family members. Only the most serious cases, like homicide, reach the county level. So that's kind of it's set up. I, I I go back and forth. Like sometimes I support the way Kansas City does it, sometimes I don't. But it also shows a greater need for why we need to have restorative justice here in Kansas City too. I think our community would very well, benefit from that. I really do. And there's just a lot that goes into that. But you wrote a victim impact statement, and it's on your website, amandacarrasco.com,
Mhm.
and it's on your blog. but you wrote a victim statement. And one of the things that you stated was writing a victim statement is a gut-wrenching process, to put it mildly. I am thinking of all the victims who have had to do this process, and I am with you. This is something that I have not had to do personally, but I did run into my one of my perpetrators in a church. And I was thinking, like, you couldn't be any further from God than anybody else. Because
Mhm.
if this congregation knew what you did,
Mhm.
and if they would have known what he
Yeah.
did, they wouldn't allow him through the door. I can already tell you that. And this is a fairly progressive church. I'm not going to name
Mhm.
drop it, but it's a fairly progressive church here in the city. Um, but it's I cannot imagine writing this to the person who caused your life to be different from that point going forward. July of 1994. How old were you? You were 15, right?
16.
16.
Yeah.
And what writing this victim impact statement, what was the process that you had to go through? How many times did you have to rewrite it? How many times, what was that process like for you?
Well, if you dig, there's more than one, right? Because
Hmm.
we've had a couple hearings, so I have to do this again. He is up for parole. There will be another hearing in December, so I have to write another one. Um, it's I mean, it's really hard. It's really hard because you do have to look at where you're at, what you're feeling, because part of writing the victim impact statement is about you as the victim. There's another part, though, that also looks at where he's at, right? Because one of the things that we can do is we can ask for recommendations, that he not be permitted to go in certain areas for safety reasons or, have certain limitations. All those decisions are with the board, but we can ask for things. So you have to kind of look at those, and you also are allowed to say, what your thought is. And so every time that he's gone before the board, I have included in my statement the fact that I don't believe that he has changed, that I don't believe he's remorseful, that I do believe he's a danger to the community. He hasn't done the work. And this is where, when I talked about those men in the prisons that I've been working with are so helpful. And because I've asked them questions and I'm like, you guys, like, am I off base on this? What do you see here? And, we talk about different things and they wrestle it through with me. And I love that. Um, and they've just given me such great insight, in terms of what accountability and remorse looks like. And so I overlay that on top of what I see with him and his behaviors, how he acts, things he's done or not done in the prison, even, just my experience with him and he's not there. And so every time I have to go before the board and I say like, please don't release him, and they have not, and I've been pleased with the board in Canada. I'm not going to say that I've been
Hmm.
pleased with every parole board that I have encountered in terms of my criminal justice work. But I will say that in this particular case, like, and I'm not just saying just because they don't let him out, but, you know, as I'm listening to them, and they allow him to sort of present his case and they do their evaluation. And I just see that he's not snowballing them, like they kind of get things and they see the same things that I'm seeing. Like I feel like we're on the same page in terms of, he wants a playbook. Give me the 10 things I have to do to get out of here. And they're like, no, no, but that's not how this works. Like,
Hmm.
and I just had one of my guys in the prison. He helps prepare people for board. And there was a young man who came to him and said, hey, I've got board in like 3 months. Like, are there groups I can sign up to? Like, what do I got to do? And he was like, oh, son, let's talk. Like, that's not how this works. It's not about like, what are the hoops I have to jump through to get free. It's literally
Hmm.
about the work that you have to do inside to get free. And as you are doing the inside work to be free, that's going to come out. And then, you're going to develop this sort of resume, if you will, that you can present before the board because of the work that you've done on the inside that is now showing on the outside. It's not about this, tick box list, but yet that's how a lot of people see it. but that's also what's going to keep you in jail because you're not doing the work. It is about addressing the factors within yourself. And that doesn't just mean like, um, I mean, you have to take responsibility and accountability, but you also need to recognize what got you there. Are there traumas that you experienced that you haven't dealt with? Like I
Mhm.
say, like when you look at the prison population, they're all high on the ACEs score, like, and then they're in a place that is also traumatizing. You and I could talk about prisons and my stance on prisons and how awful they are and how we need to make changes there, because
Mhm.
we're not doing better. Like I don't feel like we're doing any better. I look at capital punishment and I'm like, well, the death certificate says murder, on
Mhm.
a person that is put to death by the state. It's murder because it is murder. So how are
Mhm.
we any better than other, the people that are committing harm? Like how is it different? Like I don't see as much of a distinction. Like I understand the nuances are not quite the same, but we're still ending a life. We're still ending the possibility of someone to change. And I
Mhm.
know that it's possible. So that doesn't sit well with me. But I'm on a rabbit trail. Help me. Come
No, you're
back.
you're completely fine. I read an
Sorry.
article with Yahoo News Canada,
Hmm.
and one of the judges approved inmates class action over inhumane prison isolation during pandemic
Hmm.
because he serves as the inmate wellness committee chair. I know
The
you have a
irony,
lot of
right?
thoughts.
The
I know you have a
irony.
lot of thoughts about this. I know you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
But as chair of the inmate wellness committee at his prison, Dean
Yeah.
Christopher Roberts was allowed to go cell to cell at that institution to speak with inmates through the bars during some of the early weeks of COVID-19 pandemic. I read this and I was thinking, what?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like this is kind of coincidental, right? And the audacity. And
Yeah.
we don't have to dive more into this. I just wanted to add that part in there. But what? It's
Yeah,
like,
that's been hard. Like honestly, that's been hard. And I've even spoken with other lawyers too, because like he's the
yeah.
lead plaintiff on the class action. And some of the other lawyers said, like, what are they doing? Because how do you have this man as your lead plaintiff? Like
Mhm.
the lawsuit itself, I believe in the premise of the lawsuit, but who they're allowing to champion it,
Mhm.
obviously that doesn't sit well with me, like because he's not a poster boy for anything. And I mean, the board sees it, the family, we all see it, like because we know him. But I think they've just kind of taken this and run with it. But just it goes to show too, like I mean, we were all fooled. Like honestly, I had no idea that he was the murderer. None. I was horrified when they arrested him. I used to go and bring him letters to the jail where he was at, and I used to write to him most days of the week to say, Dean, you're going to get out, you're going to be free. Like, this is horrible. I don't know what they're doing, but the truth is going to come out. The truth is going to come out. And the truth did come out, because my sister sheltered me from a lot of things. And so, as we're talking about like domestic violence, awareness month, like I didn't see things that happened, but he was abusing her. She was trying to protect me from those types of things. And just like the statistics show, like the violence escalates at the point that you're about to leave. And she was about to leave. She had called and was starting to look at options to go, options for divorce. And I mean, she was not working. She had three children, three and under. Like how she doesn't come from a family with a ton of resources. So like, how do you leave? You mentioned that about, people just say, well, why don't you just leave? Okay, but like how? Like, what does that look like? How are her bills going to get paid? Where is she going to go? Where is she physically going to take her children? Who is going to help her? Right? So she was starting to do the investigative work into that piece. But
Mhm.
I mean, there were a lot of people that saw a few different things. And that's why I say, like, as we went through the preliminary hearing and then through the trial, like there was a lot of things that all came out. And I mean, it's super clear that he was their murderer. But he's very, very good at image management. And a lot of perpetrators are. right? Like I know you know this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
All too
that's the thing.
well.
So I'm appreciative that the prisons are being challenged on the conditions and the things that they're doing. And this is the thing though, like you can hold both things. Like we oftentimes will feel like, you know, you have to be all against everything or not, like it's black and white. But the reality is our world is every shade of gray. It's not black and white for the most part. And so I can still hold the man who murdered my family accountable, say that he should not be released from prison, but also hold that prison should not dehumanize people and treat them like they're not humans. And that's what happens. But again, this is where I come to like, listen, he dehumanized us. We were objects for his purpose. He was done with us. He wanted us out of the way so that he could move on. He could live his life and sleep with whoever he wanted to, unchecked, unaccounted. He could have the life insurance money they had taken out. I was there, like when the insurance guy came. I was there when they set all that up. He had a plan. He wanted the money and freedom, and that was his pathway to it. We were in the way of that for him, and so we weren't people, and he was going to kill us, and succeeded in ending three lives, and then destroying the rest of us. Really, like so. I think that it's really important to understand that I don't want to be him. I don't want those same thought processes as him. You can still hold people accountable and not put them in a cell, that I mean, look at the research and things in terms of like solitary and the need for communication, the need for connection, the need for all these things. Like, how are we any better? We also honestly as a community 95% of people are released from prison. They're coming out. Like they're going to be our neighbors. This is reality. So, how do you want them to come out, even when they've committed harm? Like, if we gave them a place where they could address their traumas, where they could address the factors of where they were, you can't do that well in prison, because you are constantly under threat. I've spent a lot of time talking with my friends and clients about what the conditions are like in a prison and in a jail. They are so traumatizing. So anybody that comes out of there and actually does well, I believe is an absolute miracle. And so I can still hold perpetrators to account, but also hold that the conditions and how we're treating them are not okay. I can hold both those things. I don't have to pick one or the other. I'm sorry, but I'm not going to. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. I have to agree with you. I've heard a lot of horror stories about what inmates face inside of prisons, not only in the United States, not just in Canada, but all across the world, right? And there's a lot of horrific stories. And this is why I created the Rise of the Justice Movement, is to bring the multifaceted approach to what the criminal justice system looks like, the juvenile justice system, family court, etc. And we have so much work to do. And oftentimes we hear that a system is broken, but it leaves me with the question of how can a system be broken when it's working exactly how it was designed to work to
Absolutely.
to further marginalized communities and to ostracize them and re-victimize them. We see TV shows, and don't get me wrong, like, I've said on like previous episodes that I absolutely love Olivia Benson, right, with Special Victims Unit.
Yeah.
However, they make it look so incredibly fucking easy, and it's not like that. I can't just
No.
walk into a police station and say I was raped and I'm automatically believed like 100% and no questions asked. And in my own experience, I walked into my police station and like, well, why didn't you fight him off? Were you not strong enough to do it?
Hmm.
And it's like, who exactly are you serving and protecting? Because it sure as hell is not me.
Yeah.
And come to find out, after I broke my silence on my own story, come to find out I'm not the only one in my community that dealt with that. I'm not the only one.
Hmm.
And there's like countless of others. And I was finally able to file my report. I decided not to prosecute because it's like I cannot face him again. And
Hmm.
now that I think about it, it's like I wonder if I would have had access to restorative justice. I mean, I know I could still do it. I honestly just don't think that I could be in the same room as him.
Hmm.
Because what I know now about him is I'm not his only victim. I'm not his only person that he did this to. And I found that out afterwards. And there's a whole group of us. But then, I share my story with a journalist, and I will go more into this on my own episode, which stay tuned. My own episode will be coming out fairly soon. But there was a journalist, and I'll break my silence on that. And I'm letting Amanda, but also people that are listening to this episode, I have a very harrowing story that's going to shock the world. Um, I shared my story to a journalist and come to find out that he actually is a convicted sex offender himself. He disguised under the role of a journalist, even though he actually was not a journalist, but he knows a lot about me. And again, I will break my silence. I will name drop because he's in jail, he's in prison. But I don't have anything to hold back. I don't have any fear. But even under the disguise of a journalist, we have this thing that, we're supposed to trust them, we're supposed to believe them, they take our stories and, they edit them, they water it down. I know that's been my experience. Like, as I told you before we started recording, Amanda, that I've been on some podcasts and I speak for like an hour and 30 minutes, but there's only like 30 minutes of my interview that actually airs, and
Hmm.
nothing's wrong with that. I mean, if that's how somebody wants to do the show, that's fine. But I believe something different. I believe in giving the platform to the voices that don't reach those headlines. I mean, we're talking, we just talked to like Jess Michaels, which the Jeffrey Epstein case is one of the most horrific sex trafficking cases in the United States history, but also not just the United States, because it branches on outside of the United States too, like the UK, Israel, etc. Um, there's a lot, it's a very complex case, but there's a lot more cases outside of that that do not get that recognition. And even, gosh, we have so many things going on in this country that it's so hard to keep track of. And one of my next questions for you is how do you maintain positivity? Like, how do you see us as a country and as a world moving forward? And what does the future look like to you?
Well, not to
I
put
know,
brownie points, but I will say, honestly, Zach, it's people like you. Um, it's my kids, it's younger generations that are understanding these types of concepts and seeing, like you said, like the system's not broken. They're seeing the system work the way it's supposed to, but they're going, this isn't giving us the outcomes that we were promised. This isn't giving us justice, in the way that we want it and in a way that is healing and that is restoring. And we don't want that. I love that about younger generations right now that are really challenging the systems and tradition. And, this is the way that we do things in a way that I don't think has ever happened in history. We see this rise up. And so, like my generation and older, so I'm a Gen Xer, my generation and older, I mean, it's so easy for us to like get really angry at that and be like, no, but this is the way that it's done. And, like, no, stop, you guys are snowflakes and you guys are, and I see all of that condemnation. And I'm like, man, y'all so threatened. Like, it's okay to change and it's okay to admit mistakes. It's okay to admit that this isn't working, that we didn't get what we wanted or needed. And let's support our younger generations. Like, and I think I love the way the US has really started to embrace restorative justice in the schools. I think that is going to really make and shape our future. The educational component there and how we, address conflict and harm, the programs of empathy, bringing babies into kindergarten classes, all these types of things that seem kind of trivial or, weird or whatever, but like they're actually building very strong character values into our younger generations. They are seeing the humanity in all people, regardless of race, sexual orientation, all of that type of stuff. And so those are the things that are so encouraging for me and make me so hopeful. I am optimistic that our future is changing. And I know that can be really hard in our current climate because there's a significant uphill battle right now. However, this too shall pass. This isn't going to be forever. And what I see in the future is what drives me forward because I watch, like I say, even some of the programs and things that I'm a part of, Survivors for Justice Reform, like CROP in California, those guys that I met in the prison, like they came out, and there's still some that are incarcerated, but there's a whole contingent that are now out in the community, and I watch what they're doing and how they're speaking into generations. So I'm in-house legal counsel for an organization called Sharp Circle, and my business partner was sentenced to 65 years, and he was released after 15 because he created a life ownership program, and it was about addressing how he committed harm. How did I get here, and what is my plan moving forward? And so we now have contracts with the city of San Francisco and Monterey County, and we're working in the juvenile system. We're working with youth who, have committed rape, who have committed murder, robberies, all these kinds of things, and we are pouring into them and walking alongside them. We're now, incorporating reentry with them out into the communities so that these plans, this life ownership packet that they have created for, addressing where they came from and what they're going, we can help them with community supports, education, housing, all the things that actually lead to crime, all the contributing factors, giving them safety, addressing their trauma, all those types of things. And so I'm super radically optimistic because we did not have these kinds of supports before, because I see the shift. But it's hard because change takes so long, but it's also why I advocate, like, anywhere and everywhere I will go, I will speak to prosecutors, defendants, judges, and I will talk about, like, what could restorative justice look like here? Is it a collaborative sentencing plan where we're bringing together victims and defendants who want to plead guilty, and we're going to make a sentencing plan together? We're incorporating them. It's going to alleviate from the docket, a whole bunch of cases that don't need to be there. And like you said, like, what if that had been an option for you? Right? Like, this needs to be an option. And I'm saying that, like, not totally abolish the system, but we can make significant changes that are going to see dramatic results. It's going to reduce crime in terms of just bringing cases, out of the system, because they're not going to happen in the first place, because offenders are not going to be recommitting crimes in a large contingency of this. It's also going to alleviate dockets off of prosecutors' workloads because restorative justice facilitators can help with that. And if you really want to break down to numbers, because sometimes dollars talk, like, funding restorative justice programs actually lowers the budget because you have less people incarcerated. The thousands and thousands and billions of dollars that go into incarcerating people, like, we will see financial tax savings by investing in social programs. And that definitely fundamentally includes restorative justice options. You're going to see greater healing for victims when they are listened to, when they are heard, when they are given power, when they are given an opportunity to have a voice in this entire process. But again, just give them the option. If they say, no, I don't want that, I'd rather go through the other system. Okay, that's fine. That's totally great. I support you in that decision because you were able to make a decision. Right now, when you report, like, you're not often really allowed to make a decision. I have seen police threaten a witness, and they said, we'll take away your children if you don't show up, and like, we can't do that to victims, like, no, this has to be their driven narrative, right? So this is really significant. This is really important. We as communities need to step up and say, we demand restorative justice options. We want to be a part of justice. We think about justice as being in the courtrooms or the prisons, but justice is found in us. Look at, Plato and Aristotle, they talked about justice being in our relationships, in us as community. And that's the thing, like you said, I don't know that I want to sit in the same room as him. But if you don't have that need, then you wouldn't need to. You know what I mean? Like, that's where you're at, and that's okay. But some other people would have. I did. I did with two, and so that was helpful for me. So giving that option to people that want it, that need it, like, let's do that. But people don't know if they don't know. So that's why we do what we do, right?
Exactly. And I think about if I didn't do it, who's going to? And
Mhm.
because these systems are not going to save us. We already know that. We see that on a daily basis. I mean, and it's gotten even worse now under the current political climate and the Trump administration. I feel, the Department of Justice is withholding these Jeffrey Epstein files, like the unredacted Jeffrey Epstein files. And you also see, like the P. Diddy case is a very significant one that I've been watching, and for him to be sentenced to 4 years and 2 months, knowing everything that he did to his victims, like Cassie Ventura fine, which I unequivocally believe and I stand with and unite behind. I also think about the Jeffrey Epsteins that could be the next door neighbor to me, that could be, my Uber driver, that could be a Lyft driver, it could be anybody because we have people that have that mentality running rampant through our communities. And
Mhm.
who do they see on TV? Who do they see in the headlines? And who are they hearing from on a podcast? Right. And I think about that. And I want to highlight something really quick that a friend of our movement, Leah, also known as Off the Clock Nurse on Instagram, put up a post earlier today. Today is October 6th, 2025. And she put up a post that says 5 direct actions men can do to stop domestic violence. She's a RN, she's a registered nurse, and she's also worked with survivors for countless years. But challenge sexism. Immediately speak out against sexist jokes or degrading language. Silence enables violence. Number two, be an interrupter. If you see a situation escalating, intervene safely, use distraction or delegation. Number three, model respect. Demonstrate empathy and nonviolence in all your relationships. Lead by example. Number four, mentor boys. I was just talking about this, about who people are seeing on the TV and seeing in podcasts and seeing on, in the news and headlines. Mentor boys, teach young men about consent and equality, be a conscious role model. And number five, support survivors. Supporting survivors. It should be an absolute common thing. It doesn't take a whole lot. It literally starts with believing what somebody is telling you and helping them through what they are telling you and walk them through their journey because oftentimes people do it alone, which leads to higher rates of re-victimization or further along. And it gets very, people don't recognize that the numbers behind statistics has an actual person behind that statistic, and that's a human
That's right.
being, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But number five, support survivors. If someone confides in you, believe them and connect them to professional resources. Leah is one of my favorite people. She'll be on a future podcast episode here fairly soon, but we're going to talk about like forensic nurse exams and like SANE, which SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner, which I've only done it once. And it was in Minnesota, and it was a unique experience. And I remember like it was yesterday. I remember, taking my clothes off, going through the whole process, going through all the pictures and everything, and doing all the DNA testing, number of things, and it, I had a good experience. However, it was also super traumatizing because I had to tell my story again, to the nurse and to the detective that was there and go through all of that whole freaking process all over again. And it was a lot to process. But my last question for you, Amanda, and we'll wrap up. My last question for you is what is one thing you want to tell somebody who is listening to this that may be going through something similar to you? And what piece of advice would you give to them?
Mhm. But this is going to sound like really cheesy and really corny, but I would say be brave because you're probably telling yourself things like that you don't matter, you're minimizing your, like you're going to be in such a head spiral. And so there's going to be actions that you need to do that you're not going to feel qualified for, equipped for, good enough for, or, you know, and that may just be like, yeah, reaching out to someone, and letting someone know what happened. Like, when you listen to the podcast with Jessica and where she was brave and she told her friend, like that was big. That was significant for her. And I'm so, so proud of her that she was able to do that at that time, and I understand why she didn't go to the police. I mean, there were several of my assaults that I also did not go to the police at the time. I did report subsequently, quite some time later. And, I had my reasons for doing that later, but, um, I mean, whether you choose to report or not, that's your decision, but in the meantime, like if something has happened, you do need to find someone, at least one person that is safe, that is understanding. And if you choose to tell someone who is not a safe, understanding person that you thought was, you know, please don't take what they say and hold that. Find someone who is someone who will believe you, who will support you, because that's really important. Like Gabor Mate talks about trauma and how it kind of has such a detrimental impact on us because we're alone. Like if you go through something and you have support, Jessica talked about that too, about that, immediate support and then branching out for like 90 days and that kind of a thing. Like that is significant in terms of, how deep these wounds have to go or don't have to go. But no one can help if you don't tell them. And that's really hard. Like it's really, really hard. So but like I say, like, finding people, there are a lot of places. If you don't have someone that you feel you can tell that like you might feel awkward telling a family member or a friend. Like there are so many resources, crisis centers. um I've told people before, like, like I've put this out there on other, podcasts and platforms, like reach out to me, let me know. And I've had some incredible conversations, some incredible connections, and then been able to sort of like further connect people with other resources that are close to them. Like there are people that don't know you, whether it's myself or Zach, or there's people out there that you could reach out to we're also like, we're here, we believe you, we want to be a source of support. But again, like if you have people that are close that can walk with you, your friends, your family members, that's amazing. Let people support you because you need it, and that's okay. That's it's it matters. Like you matter, and your healing matters, and walking this out matters. I tried for so many years. Like I just was like, I'm putting this in a box, it's going under the stairs, I'm not going to think about it, I'm not going to talk about it, I'm just going to carry on, and it's not going to affect me. That's not how trauma works though. Like those boxes under the stairs, they don't stay there. Like it does, it impacts your decisions, it impacts your life, in significant ways. And so the sooner that you can get support and healing and work through as much as you can at the time, the better off you will be in the long run. So that's really you know, my plea is reach out, use your voice that you may feel like you don't have anymore, but you can advocate for yourself, you can find support and resources. And I think, Zach, I think you said it earlier, like the system isn't going to save you, right? Like there are things that we have to do. There are aspects of my healing and my survival where I had to save myself. There were things that only I could do. So do the things that you need to do and find the places that will connect with you and help you and provide the other pieces of support. I'm so thankful for my community. Like I'm thankful for my sister, and as long as I had her, because even though like I like her life was so cut short, the impact that she had on me at that time, like I didn't believe in myself, but I knew she believed in me. I knew she saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. And I carried that with me. And then I encountered more people along my path and my journey that also saw things in me that I really didn't believe were true. It was like, how can you see that? We're looking at the same thing. Like, you're looking at me, I'm looking at me, and I don't see it, but they would see it. And I just was kind of like, okay, I guess, maybe, until I got to the place where I could do the work. And now I see what she saw. It was there the whole time. But all of the trauma, all the lies, all the horrible things that happened blinded me to that. It's like I was wearing like 18 different coats and I had to take those off to find myself underneath, but I was there the whole time. I wasn't lost. I was just buried. And I had to go through the process of unburying, and it's hard and it's painful, but it's so worth it because that's when you get to be free. That's when you get to, live your life in the way that you want to, and I'm not controlled by anger or by hatred. I still get angry. I sure get angry, at times, for people that have harmed me. But I don't live there anymore. I don't carry that. That doesn't define who I am. The things that happen to me, those don't define who I am. I am a survivor of sexual assault. That's true. But what that looks like in my advocacy and my, passion for helping others, like, it's so different than how I used to see it. I used to see myself as a survivor of sexual assault, but that I was shameful and dirty and useless and not good for anything. And I did actually encounter people that reinforced those either directly or indirectly, like, and it's so mortifying that people hold to those beliefs, but they are fewer, and you need to not listen to those voices. Those are not the truth. Find the people that will support you, that will help you, because you're so worth it. Like, your life matters, your story matters, all of it matters. And so advocate for yourself and get to a place where you can have a whole support system. I would not be where I am or who I am without the people in my life. And I've specifically name dropped people in my book, like, that have been uh, such significant contributors to why I survived, to why I made it, and now I'm succeeding because I like who I am. And so you can get there. Like, I know that you can, but don't give up. Advocate for yourself. Be brave. Keep going. Whatever that looks like for you today, just do whatever is the next right thing that you need to do, one thing at a time.
You said a key thing, one day at a time. And this is a marathon, not a sprint. That is one thing that I always remind people. And the first time that I heard that, I don't know the original author of that specific saying. The first time that I heard it was actually on a Zoom call with the founder of Moms Demand Action, Shannon Watts. And
Mm-hmm.
it was to a group of survivors and advocates against gun violence, which I'm very big in like the gun violence prevention realm. Two of my close friends were shot and killed in two separate instances in two separate years. One was in 2019 and one was last year. And I think about that, but this is a marathon, not a sprint. And justice is the same way. I know we want it to happen like, very quick, very quick, very quick. But in reality, with the way that the systems are designed, that's not the case. Some of these cases are still ongoing and will potentially continue being ongoing, or they'll never receive their day in court, period. And that is the reality of it because our courts are backed up with all of this bullshit that's going on with different administrations and different court challenges from the states, and it's filled with all of this. Meanwhile, survivors are sitting here and victims' families of those that are no longer here because their lives were cut short due to violence. Violence continues to run rampant in our communities, and we see school shootings on a daily basis in this country. We're one of the countries that has the highest rate of violence. We're on a human rights watch, which we are. This is the very first time that we've been placed on a human rights watch in modern times. And I, but even with all of that, even within like all the rubble, I know that survivors are going to continue to rise from the ashes and rise above justice because my movement is not just a movement, it's a statement that we can all rise above justice and be a part of a movement that helps others rise above justice because it goes even further than just justice. It also goes to accountability for our systems and our communities and our perpetrators. It violence within our communities is something that's oftentimes overlooked. And I'll be damned if I will sit idly and wait for change to come. I have to be the change. I have to use what I've been through to advocate for others who are no longer here or have had their voice silenced. I will not allow that to happen as long as I am alive. I am 16 years in on my advocacy journey, and I'm not slowing down anytime soon because I can't. I have to continue going. And hearing stories like yours, Amanda, really touches me in a different way. And I want to say thank you for the work that you do and that you will continue to do. I'm so excited to sit down and read your book. I'm getting ready to purchase it myself. And I am so incredibly excited to sit down and read more of your journey. And you know, you have an open invite to be on this podcast anytime you would like to, anytime you'd like to collaborate. Um, and that goes to anybody who's listening as well. If you have a story to share, please reach out. We absolutely love storytelling. If you have a story to share, please do. And that's how we create change. We need to hear the stories. And if we don't have stories, we don't have change. Storytelling is a part of change, and we all have stories, and it's worth hearing. Even if you don't think it's worth hearing, it will make a difference in somebody's life that is listening, that is paying attention. Amanda, is there anything else you would like to share?
No, I love what you're saying. Like it's true. Like it's our stories that connect us, and that community is everything. You find a
And it's
community.
a community that none of us wanted to be a part of.
No, yeah, that. Oh my gosh, Zach, do you know how many times when I was like, can I just have a normal life that isn't this? Like
Right,
I don't I would not I don't want this story. Like
right.
I don't. I really don't. Like if I
Hmm.
could change it, this is not the story that I would want at all. But I can't change it. And so this is where it is. So what am I gonna do? And so yeah, justice is a nonpartisan issue because it's
Absolutely.
about all of us. And
Hmm.
there's not been an administration to date that has really been effective in executing justice. So I don't slag on any particular party. Like it's all right. Like we all can do better, and we all need to. Or no matter who is president, prime minister, district attorney, any of those kinds of things. Like I'm gonna advocate. Period. Like we're gonna advocate for the change that we need to see that we know will make communities safer. That will help us in our relationships with each other because we are all interconnected. There's not an us and them. There's not, the criminals and the victims. We are all part here. We're firstly tied by our humanity. We're also tied in a lot of different ways. And so I think that it matters that we just hold leaders to account in whatever way that is. And it's definitely something that I address. You'll read it, you'll love it when you get there, Zach. When I talk about like leadership and accountability, whether it's a church leader, whether it's a government leader, or whatever you are, you're a teacher, you're whatever. If you're a leader, there's a responsibility that goes with that. And so, like advocating to our leaders for how we want things to be. Like we are so often just sitting back and being like, well, this is the way that it is, and it's like, no, but it is the way that it is because we're not doing anything to change it. So yeah, I mean, it's not just the Zachs and the Amandas, right? Like it's everybody, it's everyday people that are saying, actually, we don't want it like this. Like we want something different. So it's the educational piece about what different could look like and what are the results of different, and then putting that into that work no matter who the administration is. I studied both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They both have space in their policy platforms for restorative justice reform. I looked, it's there, it exists. So it doesn't matter who is holding those positions. Like we can advocate and say, actually, according to your platform, your party platform, it's there. So we're not trying to go against anything that you guys stand for. It's literally already there. We're just asking you to actually execute this. So that's something that I think is important to know. Like we're already, that it's already there in a sense. Like the door is there, but we have to open that door, walk through that door, and implement that at all levels. So yeah, advocacy, even if you're not a victim, right? Like that's important. And too often people just go, well, this doesn't impact me personally. No, but it does, right? Community safety impacts you. Justice being executed properly. I say this about like wrongful convictions. I don't understand why people are not as mad at it as they are, because I think they just lose sight and see, well, that one person got wrongfully convicted. That's really sad for them. But no, that means that whoever committed that crime is actually still in your neighborhood. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so justice matters. How we execute justice, how we prosecute, how we deal with harm, how we deal with victims that come forward. All of these things really matter. Even if you don't feel like you've been directly personally impacted, you are being impacted. So this impacts all of us. We all need to, take action and get involved, not just the victims, but especially for the victims. We want to see that they're being supported. That's that.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the Rise of Justice Movement podcast. And we will talk to you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
Absolutely. Thank you.